The Arizona sun beat mercilessly down on the dusty main street of Copper Creek, a town that had seen better days when the railroad still brought hope and prosperity. 12-year-old Jesse McKenna kicked at the red dirt as he walked, his worn boots leaving small clouds in his wake. 3 months had passed since his father, Samuel McKenna, had fallen in a gunfight defending a stranger's honor outside Murphy's saloon. 3 months of sleeping in the church's storage room, surviving on the kindness of townspeople who barely had enough for themselves. Jesse's stomach growled as he made his way toward the abandoned stretch of road that led to the old copper mine. The other children avoided this path, claiming it was cursed, but Jesse found peace in its solitude. Here he could remember his father's stories without the pitying looks of the townsfolk. The wind picked up, swirling dust devils across the barren landscape. Jesse squinted against the grit when something caught his eye, a glint of light reflecting from a small depression in the road. Curious, he knelt down and began digging with his hands through the packed earth and scattered pebbles. His fingers closed around something smooth and cool. As he pulled it free, Jesse's breath caught. It was a ring. Not just any ring, but one crafted from what appeared to be pure gold, with intricate engravings that seemed to tell a story. At its center sat a deep red stone that seemed to capture and hold the desert light. "What in tarnation?" Jesse whispered, turning the ring over in his palm. The engravings were unlike anything he'd ever seen, symbols and letters that looked foreign, almost ancient. But what made his heart race was the initial carved clearly on the inner band. SM, Samuel McKenna, his father's initials. Jesse's mind reeled. His father had never owned anything this valuable. They'd lived simply, moving from ranch to ranch as Samuel found work breaking horses and mending fences. When his father died, Jesse had inherited nothing but worn clothes, a pocket watch that didn't work, and memories. As Jesse examined the ring more closely, he noticed something else. The red stone wasn't just decorative. It had a small crack running through its center, and inside that crack something was embedded. A piece of paper, rolled incredibly small. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Jesse quickly pocket the ring. 3 riders emerged from the heat shimmer on the horizon, moving toward town at a steady pace. Jesse recognized the lead rider immediately. Ezra Blackwood, the wealthiest rancher in the territory, a man whose presence always brought tension to Copper Creek. Blackwood's weathered face was set in its usual stern expression, his dark eyes scanning the landscape with the intensity of a hawk. Beside him rode his foreman, Dutch Carver, a man known for solving problems with his fists first and questions second. The third rider Jesse didn't recognize, a tall, thin man in a black coat despite the heat, with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time indoors than under the desert sun. "Boy!" Blackwood called out, pulling his horse to a stop near Jesse. "What brings you to this god-forsaken stretch of road?" Jesse's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, feeling the ring's weight against his leg. "Just walking, Mr. Blackwood. Sometimes I like the quiet out here." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, boy, you ever hear your father mention anything about valuable items, things he might have hidden away?" Jesse's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to meet Blackwood's gaze. "No, sir. Pa never had much of value. We live simple." The stranger in black leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps we should be more direct. Young man, we're looking for something that belonged to your father, something he acquired before his unfortunate death." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jesse said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "We'll be in touch, boy. This matter isn't closed." He spurred his horse forward, followed by his companions, leaving Jesse alone in a cloud of dust and unanswered questions. Back in Copper Creek, Jesse slipped into the church through the side door, grateful for the relative coolness of the stone building. Father Miguel was tending to the altar candles, his movements slow and deliberate in the manner of a man who had found peace with time. "Jesse, my boy," the priest said without turning around, "you look troubled. More than usual, I mean." Father Miguel had been the closest thing to family Jesse had since his father's death. The priest had known Samuel McKenna well, had even officiated at Jesse's parents' wedding years ago in this very church. "Father," Jesse began, then hesitated. "Did my father ever mention anything valuable to you? Something he might have hidden?" Jesse pulled the ring from his pocket, holding it out in his palm. Father Miguel's eyes widened, and the color drained from his weathered face. "Dios mío," the priest whispered, crossing himself. "Where did you find this?" "You know what it is?" Jesse asked urgently. Father Miguel reached out with trembling fingers, then pulled his hand back as if the ring might burn him. "I haven't seen that ring in 20 years. It belongs to the Delacroix family, wealthy landowners who owned most of this territory before the Apache Wars. They disappeared one night. Their entire ranch burned to the ground." Jesse felt the ground shift beneath him. "But it has my father's initials inside." "Your father's—" Father Miguel sat heavily in the nearest pew. "Jesse, there are things about your father's past that he never wanted you to know. Things he was trying to leave behind." Before Father Miguel could explain further, the church door burst open. Dutch Carver stood silhouetted against the harsh afternoon light, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Father," Dutch said with mock politeness, "Mr. Blackwood would like a word with the boy, something about family property that needs returning." Jesse instinctively closed his fist around the ring, but Dutch's sharp eyes caught the movement. "Now, son," Dutch continued, stepping into the church, "we can do this easy, or we can do this hard, but that ring's coming with me either way." Father Miguel stood, placing himself between Dutch and Jesse. "This is a house of God, Mr. Carver. Whatever business you have can wait. God ain't gonna help the boy if he keeps holding on to something that ain't his," Dutch interrupted. In the struggle that followed, the ring flew from Jesse's grasp, skittering across the stone floor. As Dutch reached for it, something unexpected happened. The red stone began to glow faintly in the dim church light, and the crack in its center seemed to widen. The piece of paper inside shifted, becoming more visible. Father Miguel gasped. "The Delacroix seal! I should have recognized it immediately." Dutch snatched up the ring, his expression changing from triumph to confusion, then to something approaching fear. "This changes things," he muttered. "This changes everything." Without another word, Dutch Carver turned and strode from the church, leaving Jesse and Father Miguel alone, with more questions than answers. "Father," Jesse said urgently, "what's really going on? What was my father involved in?" Father Miguel sank back into the pew, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. 20 years ago, your father was a different man, Jesse. He rode with rough men, did things he wasn't proud of. The night the Delacroix family disappeared, Samuel was there. He never told me exactly what happened, but he came to me afterward, wanting to confess, wanting to change his life. Jesse felt his world tilting. My father was an outlaw. He was a man trying to find redemption, Father Miguel said firmly. The ring was his burden to carry, and now, God help us all, it's become yours. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Copper Creek. Jesse was helping Father Miguel with morning prayers when Sheriff Tom Bradley entered the church, accompanied by a woman Jesse had never seen before. She was perhaps 40 years old, well-dressed despite the dust of travel, with dark hair and eyes that seemed familiar somehow. "Father Miguel, Jesse," Sheriff Bradley said, removing his hat, "I'd like you to meet Miss Isabel Delacroix. She arrived on the morning stage from San Francisco." Jesse stared at her, his mind reeling. You're one of the daughters?" "I am," Isabel confirmed, her voice carrying a slight French accent. "My sister, Marie, died of consumption 5 years ago in Sacramento. Before she died, she told me about the cowboy who helped our family escape that terrible night. She made me promise to find him and thank him for saving our lives." She reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a familiar object, another ring, identical to the one Jesse had found, but without the crack in its red stone. "Our father gave this to Mr. McKenna as a token of trust," she continued. "He told him that when the time came, both rings would be needed to unlock the family's true legacy." Before Jesse could respond, the church door opened again. This time it was Ezra Blackwood, flanked by Dutch Carver and the mysterious stranger in black from the day before. "Miss Delacroix," Blackwood said with cold formality, "I understand you have documents that contradict certain established facts about your family's disappearance." Isabel stood tall, facing the men who had terrorized her family decades ago. "Mr. Blackwood, I have evidence that proves your involvement in forcing my family from our land through threats and violence. I also have documentation of the real reason you wanted our property." "And what reason is that?" Blackwood asked, though Jesse could see tension in the man's posture. "Water," Isabel said simply. "My father discovered an underground river system that could irrigate thousands of acres. You weren't just after gold, Mr. Blackwood. You were after the future of this territory." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward. "Ezra, if what Miss Delacroix says is true, we're talking about fraud, theft, and possibly murder. I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning." The stranger in black finally spoke. "Sheriff, my name is Cornelius Ashford, and I represent certain business interests in San Francisco. This matter involves more than local law enforcement can handle." "Actually," Sheriff Bradley replied, "I sent a telegram to San Francisco last night. Funny thing, the federal marshal's office has never heard of you." Jesse watched as Ashford's hand moved slowly toward his coat. But Martha Williamson, Copper Creek's elderly historian, chose that moment to enter the church. "I wouldn't if I were you," she said calmly to Ashford. "Judge Morrison arrived from Tucson this morning, along with 2 federal marshals. They're very interested in hearing testimony about what really happened to the Delacroix family." Jesse felt a surge of hope mixed with vindication, but he also realized that the danger wasn't over. "This isn't finished," Blackwood said, his voice low and threatening. "There are forces at play here bigger than you can imagine." "Actually," Isabel said quietly, "I think this is exactly where it needed to end. Mr. McKenna, would you like to help me recover your father's legacy and restore justice to this territory?" Jesse looked around at the faces surrounding him. Sheriff Bradley's cautious hope, Martha's protective concern, and Isabel's determined compassion. For the first time since finding the ring, he felt like he wasn't facing the mystery alone. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'd be honored to finish what my father started." Within hours, Judge Morrison had convened an emergency hearing in Copper Creek's small courthouse. The documents Isabel had brought from California, combined with Martha Williamson's carefully preserved records, painted a clear picture of the conspiracy that had destroyed the Delacroix family. But as the legal proceedings unfolded, Dutch Carver burst into the courtroom with urgent news. "Mr. Blackwood," Dutch called out, ignoring the formal proceedings, "we got trouble. That Ashford fellow wasn't working alone. A gang of armed men is riding toward town. They'll be here by sunset." Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "Mr. Carver, explain yourself." "Your Honor," Dutch said, his urgency evident, "there are business interests that have been profiting from stolen Delacroix water rights for 20 years. When word gets out about what's in these documents, they're going to have a lot to answer for. Someone put a bounty on the lady and the rings." Isabel went pale. "We need to get to the vault," she said suddenly. "My father hid the most important evidence in a secret location on our old property. If we can reach it and document what's inside, we can telegraph the information to federal authorities." Sheriff Bradley checked his pocket watch. "We have maybe 3 hours before those riders reach town." "I know a way," Jesse said. "My father taught me every path through those hills. I can get us there without being seen." Despite the danger, the group decided to make the attempt. Jesse led them through winding canyon trails to the ruins of the old Delacroix ranch, where they accessed a hidden vault through an abandoned mine tunnel. Inside the vault, they found everything Isabel had promised: detailed maps of the underground water system, documentation of threats against the family, and evidence of the conspiracy that reached far beyond Ezra Blackwood to include powerful businessmen across the territory. But their discovery was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. As they prepared to flee through a secondary exit, Jesse realized that their time for running was over. "We make our stand here," he said with quiet determination. "We get these documents to Judge Morrison and the federal authorities. We make sure the truth comes out, no matter what it costs." As they emerged from the vault into the ruins of the main house, Jesse could see riders surrounding the property, but he also saw something else: signal fires burning on distant ridges and answering fires appearing on other peaks around the valley. The citizens of Copper Creek were responding to Judge Morrison's call for help. In the gathering twilight, as the final confrontation began, Jesse stood ready with the documents that would vindicate his father's memory and expose decades of corruption. Ezra Blackwood, faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, finally confessed his role in the conspiracy. The mysterious gunmen, finding themselves outnumbered by angry townspeople and federal marshals, surrendered without a fight. As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, Jesse McKenna, no longer just an orphan, but a young man who had faced down powerful enemies in the cause of justice, watched as the last of the conspirators were loaded into wagons bound for the territorial prison. Isabel Delacroix, her family's legacy finally restored, made arrangements to deed the water rights to the territory for the benefit of all settlers. The underground river system would bring prosperity to the region for generations to come. Sheriff Bradley approached Jesse as the boy stood looking out over the desert landscape where his adventure had begun. "Your father would be proud, son," the lawman said quietly. "You showed the same courage he did when it mattered most." Jesse nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't known since his father's death. Samuel McKenna's sacrifice had finally been vindicated. The ring had led him not just to treasure, but to the truth about his heritage and the strength to honor his father's legacy. The brave cowboy's Orphan had found more than a shiny ring buried in the desert road. He had found justice, courage, and his place in a story of redemption that would be remembered long after the desert winds had erased their footprints from the sand. The ring had indeed changed everything, forever.